There's only one man who can still save the Cleveland Browns season, and that is Jameis Winston. You see, heading into the year, there was a bit of a conversation surrounding who the best quarterback was on the Browns roster. And when you're paying one of your guys $230 million, with the majority of it being guaranteed, those aren't the kind of discussions you want to be hearing about when the season is right around the corner. And the Browns front office and coaching staff knew this, which is why they decided to start the season with Deshaun Watson under center. And we all know how that's worked out. I mean, Deshaun Watson hasn't played a lick of good football in 4 years. He has been a shell of his former self since joining the Cleveland Browns. I mean, there's a reason why we don't see Joe Flacco on the roster anymore. He came in halfway through the year last year and carried this team to the playoffs at 39, 40 years old? And not only did he take them into the playoffs, they won a few playoff games. And yet, you don't see Joe Flacco on the roster. Why is that? Because he posed a threat to Deshaun Watson's starting QB position. And the Browns can't be having that. Sure, they would love a great backup like Flacco, but not when it causes these rumors about who should be starting at quarterback, which is why they let Flacco walk in the offseason. A huge mistake, if you ask me, because this Browns roster is built to win right now. So why wouldn't they do everything in their power to give them the best opportunity to win? Well, because they owe one guy hundreds of millions of dollars, and if he doesn't work out, well, everybody in that front office is fired. That's why they feel obligated to keep Deshaun Watson under center until they absolutely have to move on from him. Thankfully for the Browns, and I don't say this with any ill intent, Deshaun Watson had an Achilles injury that ended his season. So now they get to start their new backup, Jameis Winston, who's arguably the better quarterback at this point. And you'd be lying to yourself if you thought that there wasn't anybody in that Browns organization who wasn't jumping for joy when Deshaun Watson went down. Because now, they don't have to admit to the rest of the world that they made a huge mistake in not only trading for the guy, but signing him to that ridiculous contract. Deshaun Watson has been straight up bad for the Browns all year. There's a reason they're 1-6, and it isn't because of their defense or their lack of weapons, it's because of their quarterback. Deshaun Watson went out and threw only 5 touchdowns in his 7 starts so far, had 3 interceptions, and let's not even mention the fact that his completion percentage has dropped off a mountain since joining the Browns and now sits at 63%? Yeah, completely different compared to his time in Houston. And Deshaun Watson has only thrown for about 1,048 yards. It's not like the Browns were getting blown out in these games. In fact, a majority of their games have been very close. And yet, Deshaun Watson wasn't good enough to lead them to victory time and time again. And we'll talk more about Deshaun Watson and Jameis Winston in a second, but for right now, I wanted to remind you guys to slow down, like the video, and subscribe to the channel. Every subscription goes a long way and is very much appreciated as we're on the road to 5,000 subscribers. So, make sure to hit that subscribe button. All right, now let's get back into talking about Browns football. And under Deshaun Watson, this Browns offense ranked near the bottom in almost every major statistical category. They were competing with teams like the Jacksonville Jaguars, Tennessee Titans, and New York Giants for the worst offense in the NFL. And when you take a look at the Browns' talent on the offensive side of the football compared to those of the previous teams I just mentioned, well, they shouldn't be near the same. I mean, the Browns had a superstar in Amari Cooper as their #1 wideout, and Amari Cooper has been great in years past. But with Deshaun Watson this season, he just didn't look good, and that was because of the quarterback, and that's why Amari Cooper now got shipped out to the Buffalo Bills, where I promise you, come playoff time, Amari Cooper is going to look like a stud in that Bills offense. You also got a guy like Jerry Jeudy who has a load of potential that needs to be unleashed. He didn't work out in his first stop with the Denver Broncos, but he's hoping to revive his career with the Cleveland Browns, and that's near impossible when your quarterback is Deshaun Watson. Hell, you throw in Nick Chubb to the mix, who did join the season a little late because of an injury last year, but even when Deshaun Watson and Nick Chubb were playing together, it just didn't mesh well. And that's why you bring in a guy like Jameis Winston. You see, Jameis Winston had to come in towards the end of the Cincinnati Bengals game because Deshaun Watson went down with his Achilles injury. And now you have Jameis Winston in a blowout game, but he has 2 or 3 drives to kind of play around with. What does he do? Look pretty good in the drives given to him. Hell, he even gets a touchdown on the board for the Cleveland Browns. And while they do lose a huge divisional matchup against the Bengals, there is a bit of hope for the future, because when Jameis Winston ran that offense at the end of the Bengals game, you know, people were excited. People in Cleveland felt like maybe their season wasn't over quite yet. And if you follow the NFL, you know that Jameis Winston is a very interesting case. You see, from time to time in his career, he has shown flashes of stardom. Yet his one worst quality is that the man is not consistent enough. He is the definition of inconsistency. There's a reason the Tampa Bay Buccaneers gave him 5 years as their starting QB, because they had hope that Jameis Winston would figure it out for the long run. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to, ends up getting replaced by Tom Brady, and Tom Brady takes that same exact roster to the Super Bowl and they win it. So Jameis Winston, while he was great in his time in Tampa, wasn't nearly as consistent as the Buccaneers would have hoped for. Next thing you know, he gets shipped off. He's now with the New Orleans Saints, where he's a backup for 4 years, and he does have an opportunity from time to time to start for the team and show what he's made of. And that gave Jameis Winston fans hope that he would one day be a starter again. Yet he wasn't able to ever earn the starting job long term for the Saints, but he was able to make a name for himself. This is really where the media caught on to the energy that Jameis Winston brings to a football team. Next thing you know, he's with the Cleveland Browns and is now replacing Deshaun Watson. You see, the major difference between Jameis Winston and Deshaun Watson is one is extremely likable, a media darling, while the other has a bunch of cases outside of football that no one really wants to talk about or get into because it's a whole ordeal. I mean, Jameis Winston, while he may not be a superstar, the best, most talented quarterback, he is the most likable. Everyone's favorite QB. If you're not rooting for Jameis Winston, you truly are evil. I mean, every word this man says, they turn into a quote. The media loves him. His coaching staff loves him. Just about every player that Jameis Winston has ever played with has only had good things to say about him. And while we may never truly know what Jameis Winston is like behind the scenes, his character really shines through every time he talks to the media. He deserves a microphone in front of his face 24/7. Unlike some other QBs in the NFL, in Anthony Richardson, for example, who can't stop saying the wrong thing. Hell, Anthony Richardson couldn't shut up so much, he lost his starting job a few days ago. We'll talk about that in another video, but for right now, let's focus on Jameis Winston and his first start of the NFL season. He is being thrown to the wolves because he had to make a start against the Baltimore Ravens, who are on fire and look like one of the best teams in the AFC. I mean, they've got the duo of Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, who have been unstoppable every single game this season. And now they get to play against the Cleveland Browns team, who looks as dysfunctional as ever and now has a starting QB who hasn't played a whole lot of football these last few years. Jameis Winston comes in and dominates. Okay, it's as simple as that. He throws for 3 touchdowns, has no interceptions, which is one of his worst qualities, turning the ball over. Doesn't do that. Has about 334 passing yards on 27 completions in 41 attempts. Jameis Winston looked amazing against the Baltimore Ravens, and for a majority of the game, the Browns were in the lead and maintained firm control. I mean, there were chances where you thought, okay, maybe the Ravens break away here, but that never really happened. Shout out to the Browns defense too. I mean, Myles Garrett, there were some rumors that he'd get traded, especially with the way the season was looking. But if Jameis Winston is able to rack off a few wins, well, maybe just one more win before the deadline, then I don't think there's any chance of Myles Garrett being moved. So shout out to Jameis Winston if you're a fan of keeping Myles Garrett, because he is single-handedly keeping Myles Garrett on the Browns right now. But anyway, like I said, the Browns would go on to beat the Baltimore Ravens in a stunning upset, 29-24. And every receiver on the team looked great with him. Elijah Moore, Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman all had great games. Hell, I was picking up just about every single one of them in my fantasy leagues because Jameis Winston made them look like stars, and maybe that's exactly who they are. Now, that's about it for this Browns video. I really just wanted to cover the switch from Deshaun Watson to Jameis Winston. And with their upcoming schedule, maybe, just maybe, the Browns can make a bit of a push here for the playoffs. I mean, they've got the Chargers, the Saints, the Steelers, the Broncos. There's a real possibility they maybe win 3 out of 4 of those games. And now we're looking at a team who's got 5 wins and maybe 7 losses. That ain't too bad if you ask me. So shout out Jameis Winston for possibly saving the Browns season here. But anyway, that's about it for this video. Catch y'all later. Much love. Deuces.